Okay, this is my first Screencastify ever, so here we go. Today I am here to talk to you about two poems that we did not get to cover in class because of the Labor Day break. And I'm going to go through some interesting things about them. And really, since we're not being tested on them, the way that I want you to consider the poems that we go through this month is, do I want to write a paper on these? Do these sound interesting to me? And the poems that we're going to look at this month and into October are written in the 1600s. So they do use some archaic language, which can be alienating at times. But I'll do my best to explain sort of the poet's intents as best as I understand them as we go through. Okay, if I give you any vocabulary that goes along with the poems in terms of literary terms, I'm doing that because they might show up on the AP multiple choice. And we'll go through and review vocabulary periodically through the year. But if you're one who takes notes, I'll try to highlight words that you need to know through my language because I'm not entirely sure how to write with Screencastify yet. Okay, so let's get to the first poem. And you can see on my web browser, I have them side by side, and they're meant to be placed side by side. The first poem is by Christopher Marlowe, and a little tidbit, or a couple tidbits about Christopher Marlowe. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare's, and they were sort of rivals. Christopher Marlowe wrote The Duchess of Malfi, which is a play, and is probably his most famous play. And he also wrote a version of Faust, which is a play about a man who makes a deal with the devil. And versions of Faust have appeared all through literature and literary history. Christopher Marlowe was rumored to be a spy, and he was killed in a bar brawl. So he had sort of a bawdy life, and he was sort of known as a ladies' man. So I'll read his poem. I'll go through his poem, and then we'll talk about Raleigh's response to him and who Raleigh was a little bit. Okay. So Christopher Marlowe's poem is A Passionate Shepherd to His Love. Come with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that valleys, groves, hills, and fields, woods, or steepy mountain yields. And we will sit upon the rocks, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks, by shallow rivers to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And I will make thee beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies, a cap of flowers and a kirtle embroidered all with leaves of myrtle, a gown made of the finest wool, which from our pretty lambs we pull, fair lined slippers for the cold, with buckles of the purest gold, a belt of straw and ivy buds, with coral clasps and amber studs. And if these pleasures may thee move, come live with me and be my love. The shepherd swains shall dance and sing for thy delight each May morning. If these delights thy mind may move, then live with me and be my love. Okay, so that's the passionate shepherd to his love. The first question I ask if we were doing this in class is, what type of poem is it? Well, the answer is, there's two answers to it. First of all, it's a lyrical poem. A lyrical poem is one that expresses emotion. Now, there are other poems that express emotion, like an elegy or an ode, but those are very specific types of emotion, and we're not there yet. So a lyrical poem is basically like a love poem, or like, oh wow, nature's really pretty. It's also a pastoral poem, and it expresses the pastoral ideal. The pastoral ideal is a concept from Virgil, who was a Roman poet, ancient Roman poet, that comes from his poems, the Gregorics. And it idealizes a farm life that, farm life is supposed to be really beautiful and simple, and everybody needs to go back to simpler times where we live on the farm and shear sheep. So two terms, pastoral and lyric, and you can actually see it down here on this website that I'm on. Okay, so we have a pastoral lyric poem. Next, structure. What is its structure? It is 6 stanzas. Okay, I cannot think of any form that is 6 stanzas that's of note that you would need to know. And this is just separated in 6 stanzas. It's nothing significant. And what is the rhyme scheme? It's A, B, B, C, C, D, D. And some of the rhymes don't exactly match, like love and prove. There's another one. Roses and posies kind of is a slant rhyme. So you kind of got to go with faith that they do rhyme. But, excuse me, words that rhyme together, like fields and yields, those are couplets. Okay. So you would describe his poem as a 6 stanza poem with an AABB CCDD. Rhyme scheme, 6 stanzas, 4 lines in each stanza, et cetera, et cetera. And that's pretty much all you need to know about structure. What's the syllabic count? Come live with me and be my love. Okay, so 8 syllables per line. We're not going to go through meter, so don't worry about meter right now. And I think that his syllabic count usually stays consistent. The only reason why I bring up syllabic count is that if a poem or if a poet has a poem that has, let's say, 8 syllables per line, but he or she has one line that's 12 syllables long, he or she is doing that for a reason. And he's trying to bring your attention to the line with 12 syllables. So sometimes there's a rhetorical or a structural purpose for deviating from structure. So it's important to be able to recognize structure only because when deviations happen, they're usually thematically significant. Okay. So we have a pastoral lyrical poem, pastoral ideal, 6 stanzas, AABB, CCDD, et cetera, 8 syllables per line. Now, the next thing I'm going to ask you is, what words don't you know? And just from a quick scan through this, the word melodious means to sing prettily. That's in line 8. Also in line 8 is the word madrigals, which is a type of song. In line 10, we see the word posies, which is a type of flower. A kirtle, I believe, is something that you wear around your waist. I'm on stanza 4. Looks like that should be fairly obvious. Stanza 5, the word studs they're like buttons. And finally, in the first line in the last stanza, swains are like people who help the shepherd, or sort of, I think, the apprentice. Okay, so what is Christopher Marlowe doing in this poem? It literally just sounds like it's a shepherd that wants to woo this woman, and that's it. Okay, but it's not really that simple. He implores the nymph, and the word nymph in both of these poems, well, in the second poem, it's not used in the first poem, but the word nymph is not like the Greek mythology nymph that some of you may know. It's more just like a young maiden. Okay. So in the first 2 stanzas, the way he sells himself to her in terms of wooing her is like he's going to give her gifts from nature. Okay. He's going to give her things that are immediately available to him. And, they're beautiful. I mean, he's going to, watching sheep cross the mountain, I would assume, is really relaxing and pleasing. And to listen to the birds sing, I guess that would make one romantic. And so so the first 2 stanzas have to do with giving her experience. Okay. Then the third stanza, I get the sense, and even though it doesn't say it explicitly, I get the sense that the woman is kind of not buying it. And so he starts talking about material things, like things that he can actually give her that are physical. So we have roses and posies, but it's not just posies. It's like 1,000 posies. So now we're dealing in hyperbole, because to pick 1,000 posies is a pretty massive undertaking. And to embroider leaves of myrtle and to make a crown of flowers, that's labor intensive. So he is escalating the nature of his gifts And although it's not explicitly stated, it's implied because she's not buying it, like literally and figuratively. And then 4 stanza. Now we're in a gown made of the finest wool. And he has access to wool because he's a shepherd. But the last line in that stanza, it all goes south because he's talking about buckles of the purest gold. A shepherd in 1599 England is not going to have access to gold. So now we're going into fantasy land. Okay? He's promising things to her that he cannot deliver. And it gets worse as we continue on to the next stanza. A belt of straw and ivy buds. Sure, he can provide that. With coral clasps and amber studs. Now, the first couple of years I taught this poem, I didn't make much of coral clasps and amber studs, but then I thought about it, and I think probably a student brought it up to me. Coral, at that time, if you think about it, well, where do you get coral? You get coral in warm climates, probably in the Caribbean, and at that time, I do believe we had established trade, and coral was very rare. So the rarer the material, the more expensive it is. I would hazard to guess that coral is probably more expensive than gold, although, don't quote me on that. And amber is fossilized sap, so if any of you have seen Jurassic Park. So amber and coral are 2 very rare materials for the shepherd to promise. So going through the first 5 stanzas, you see the escalation of things that he's promising her because she's not giving in. And then at the end, he just sort of wraps it up and says, then we'll sing and dance and etc. Okay. So that's the poem. Pretty simple, moving on. We don't know what her response ever is because the shepherd never really gives her a chance to say anything. Okay. So very typical poem written at the time, male voice trying to woo a woman. Okay, now moving to the second poem. The nymphs reply to the shepherd. Sir Walter Raleigh, who is wrote this in 1600, he was somebody who went to the New World, he engaged in trade, he brought things back to England, I believe, like tobacco. And he was a rival of Marlowe's and did not like him. So he is going to write the smackdown of Marlowe in the voice of the woman. Now, it's not uncommon to have 2 poems either written by the same poet or even by different poets that speak to each other. It's something that they've taken out of the AP test, so I'm not going to drive it into your head, but just be aware that poets often will write poems to each other in different voices, and it's really kind of interesting. Okay, so we have Sir Walter Raleigh and the nymphs reply to the shepherd. And as you can see, 6 stanzas, even before I read it, 6 stanzas. Its rhyme scheme is AABB, CCDD, 8 syllables, every line. So Raleigh is obviously writing something satirical or something to poke fun at Marlowe. So let me read the poem and let's see what it says. And remember, this is in the voice of the woman who has just been promised coral and amber and gold and all this stuff. Okay, so she says, if all the world and love were young, and truth in every shepherd's tongue, these pretty pleasures might me move to live with thee and be thy love. Time drives the flocks from field to fold, when rivers rage and rocks grow cold, and Philomel becometh dumb. The rest complain of cares to come. The flowers do fade in wanton fields, to wayward winter reckoning yields, a honey tongue, a heart of gall, in fancy spring, but sorrow's fall. Thy gowns, thy shoes, thy bed of roses, thy cap, thy kirtle, and thy posies, soon break, soon wither, soon forgotten, in folly ripe, in reason rotten. Thy belt of straw and ivy buds, the coral clasps and amber studs, all these in me no means can move to come to thee and be thy love. But could youth last and love still breed, had joys no date, nor age, nor need, no need, then these delights my mind might move to live with thee and be thy love. Okay, So what you can see is that the language from Raleigh, he stole, he borrowed, took direct words, straw, buds, gown. So what Raleigh does is he takes the objects that the passionate shepherd has promised the nymph and spins them into something different. Okay, we have the form. We know what kind of poem it is. Now let's talk about vocabulary. Okay, the word philomel, which is on line 7, is a reference to a bird. And when philomel becometh dumb, that line means when the bird stops singing. A honeyed tongue, which is on line 11, would be like to speak words that are meant to deceive. And a heart of gall, that has to do with the 4 humors. I don't know if any of you went over that in AP Euro. But the gall is meant to evoke like bitterness, a bitter heart. Let's see, anything else? Looks like everything else is pretty self-explanatory. So the question, if we were sitting in class, I would ask is, okay, so what is the nymph's argument? Well, the nymph's argument is that everything that the shepherd promised, all the way up to the gold being the last word in the 4th stanza of Marlowe's poem, is transient. It will rot. It will die. Okay? And that's why in the same line in Raleigh's poem, which is the 12th line, can I count? 4, 8, 12, 16. Sorry, it's a 16th line. Apparently I cannot count. The word rotten strikes me. She says, in folly ripe, in reason rotten. So yeah, in folly, so like in carelessness, he can promise these things that are ripe, and just as the folly is ripe, so his silliness is ripe, but his reason is rotten. So he hasn't thought through the promises of all this stuff. And like she is so disinclined to go with him that even these extravagant ideas of straw of coral and amber will not move her. Now, my final point with these poems is this. In the last stanza of Raleigh's poem, he uses the word but, okay? And I'm going to stress this as an important concept as we go through all the poems in the year. But as a word is employing a poetic term called the turn, okay? And next week we're going to do sonnets, and in a sonnet, the turn is called the volta, but we're not at the volta yet. So a turn is when there is a shift in either imagery, tone, or metaphor. And it's usually, especially in poems of this time, is set off by a but or a yet. So if you ever see the word but in a poem from 16 to the 1800s, you're like, oh, the poet is shifting from one philosophical idea to the next. You're going to see that with John Donne, which we do in about 4 weeks. But to finish off, let's see what she says. She says, but could youth last and love still breed? Hath joys no date nor age no need? Then these delights might move and live with thee and be thy love. So essentially her argument is, if we were young forever, I might be moved by sort of your silly little promises here. But because I am logical and rational and know that I have to plan for my future, I can't accept your promises. Okay, so the final, I know I already said final word, but this is really the final word. Final word on these poems. We're starting to see the idea of carpe diem coming up, and we're going to see some more carpe diem poems come through our curriculum. The words carpe diem in Latin means seize the day, and the passionate shepherd to his love is one of these poems where it's like, let's live for today because we don't know what tomorrow brings, and that's it. So carpe diem is a type of poem in terms of theme. So that is it, and I'm going to try to stop recording now. So let's see how I do that. and I